On tonight's Cover One Buffalo podcast, Aaron and I talk about the Buffalo Bills wide receiver position and maybe how the new kickoff rule could impact who makes the roster. But first, our guys, Handsome Jack.
Broadcasting live to Bills Mafia Worldwide with Greg Tompsett and Aaron Quinn.
Welcome to the NFL. Doesn't matter what's happened before today. Today's a brand new day. It's a brand new season.
Your number one podcast for objective Buffalo Bills coverage. No matter where you are, we got you covered.
Good evening and welcome to the Cover One Buffalo podcast presented by William Mattar Law Offices. You are joining your host, Greg Tompsett, along with my partner in crime, Aaron Quinn. Aaron, how are we doing?
Not too bad, Greg. I saw you earlier. We were doing a little Zoom type meeting, and I was doing pretty good until my kid ate it right in front of our house here, rollerblading, going crazy, and got scrapes. It reminded me of being a kid, though. Like I was just cleaning up his scrapes before bedtime, and just that it's summer, you're gonna get them. And I don't. That's probably I miss all the other things about being a kid when I see him out playing, but I don't miss scuffing my elbows and scuffing my knees, dude. It's been probably like 20-30 years since I've had to deal with any of that, and I'm glad. That's probably the worst part about being a kid these days.
For sure. We most of our kids live in a pretty significant bubble now. Like I love when some of the videos come up of like the idea that I'm just enough older than you. I think you still qualified for most of this, but they're like in the summer, I would leave in the morning and come back maybe at dinner time, sometimes when it got dark out. And my parents just have no clue where I was the entire day, like the whole day. And like, that is such a foreign concept now of like going 12 hours without knowing where my child is. It's just a completely impossible thing to fathom.
Nope. Not even close. Not even a little bit.
So anyways, tonight we're going to continue on with our series on the wide receiver position. And we thought this was something maybe gives us an opening. We'll talk later on about the new kickoff rule. It's something that happened that was kind of in the middle of all of our other shows, and we didn't really have a chance to talk about it. And I think we want to interject it at the end of this show where we talk about, hey, is this going to impact who makes the end of the roster? So as we do with each of these different position discussions, first we want to start with, just reminding everybody who is on this roster, where are all the people that are currently fighting for positions, and then we'll kind of go through who's actually fighting for a roster spot and who's maybe starting, arguing and fighting for targets. So I'll start with a quiz for you, Aaron.
Mm-hmm.
How many current Buffalo Bill wide receivers on the 90-man roster are scheduled to make more money than Khalil Shakir?
That'll make more than Shakir?
Let's give them the assumption that right now there are 13 wide receivers on the 90-man roster. Let's pretend it's a made-up world where all 13 make the roster. Out of those 13, how many are scheduled to make more money in 2024 than Khalil Shakir?
4?
8. 8 wide receivers. 8.
KJ Hamler, are you going to make more than
8 wide receivers? KJ Hamler is scheduled to make more money than Khalil Shakir.
I knew for sure Samuel, Hollins, Coleman. Those were the ones I had.
Valdes-Scantling. And then you get into technically Claypool, Isabella, and Hamler. Their veteran minimums are higher because they've been in the league longer than Shakir.
That makes sense.
And technically because Justin Shorter was drafted a little bit earlier than Khalil
He's
Shakir,
just above him.
He's just above him too by like $38,000 or whatever it is.
Yeah.
So when I got this ready and was going through it, I was like scrolling down and looking for Shakir's name and then laughed and was like, oh, I forgot when you're a late 5th round pick, you don't make that much money.
What you're saying though is Khalil Shakir is the greatest ROI on the team.
I honestly is probably a very good argument for it. And is someone who very similar to what we've seen with Spencer Brown, what we saw with Christian Benford, Terrell Bernard. He is someone who is very much going to be in line for that PPE payment that the NFLPA does at the end of the year, where I know towards the last year of Matt Milano and I think Spencer Brown now, where they were scheduled right around what I'm showing on the screen here, late round picks are barely over $1 million. I think Spencer Brown bumped up to like 2.7 million and Milano was like 2.8 million, which when you've been making that amount, getting like a 270% increase is a really nice bump. So
Yeah.
Khalil will for sure be in that market. Before we get into some of the roles and who's going to get the most touches out of the top guys, I'm going to ask you, I think there's a pretty defined top 5 and then a battle for 6. So I think from a receiving standpoint, it is, Shakir, Samuel, Coleman, then a little bit of a tier break, Marquez Valdes-Scantling, and Mack Hollins. And I think those 5 are obviously the top 3 are genuinely roster locks. There's no realistic scenario where Samuel, Shakir, and Coleman don't make the roster. I think that Mack Hollins and Valdes-Scantling are 95% locks. I mean, you could look at the guaranteed money. Most of them salaries, although not high, are already pretty much guaranteed. Short of them getting hurt or really having something weird off the field, I think they're very likely. And then I think the battle for wide receiver 6 is pretty much all the rest of the names on this screen in varying orders. Do you think that's off? Do you think that some people think that Hollins and Valdes-Scantling are in the same mix and it's 3 roster locks and everybody else fighting for 3 spots? I think those 2 are a healthy amount above the rest.
Yeah. I think MVS is even maybe slightly ahead of Hollins in terms of guaranteed lock, but Hollins is right there. Like, one, his ability to be versatile in special teams, the size.
He's been a captain on 3 different teams as a special teams captain, and you've already heard McDermott rave about him in the press conference.
Yeah. It's and Josh Allen's been raving about him. I think that he's close to a lot. I'm not going to say it's a guaranteed lock because I could see if Chase Claypool does totally resurrect himself this year and is willing to play special teams, that could be a little redundant and maybe you have to make a decision there. But even with that, I think that Claypool will have a tough time even getting that spot because I think Hollins is pretty solidified locked in there. Yeah. So I think you're right on that. And it will actually be quite an interesting battle, which we haven't really had that much of here for that final wide receiver spot. And we'll talk about some of the special teams aspect to that, but you have a mix of players and types here you have a Chase Claypool style type, a Justin Shorter, who I know there's a lot of fans on Twitter that love that body type and his potential. KJ Hamler, super interesting to me, and that's an intriguing guy. Like, if he can stay healthy, I would love to find a way to keep him on a roster, get him involved in the offense. I think he provides something different. So this summer, that battle itself, I'm not worried about the rest of this wide receiver room. I'm interested to see how Brady plans to use those guys, and that's the intrigue for the top half of this room is like, how are you going to, without a true number one, how are you going to utilize these different aspects that you have in the room? But that battle on the back end, I find super intriguing here.
Yeah, I obviously was very dismissive of Chase Claypool when the signing first happened. I wasn't even that happy about it. Like, I didn't even want him in the locker room as a dude. I've come around on that. He's again, I think some of it's lip service, some of it he's saying what he knows he needs to say, but he's saying it. Like, I'm not going to fault the guy for saying the right things. I'm not going to judge how sincere I think he's being. He's saying the right things. He's doing the right things. He's out there playing all the coverage units on special teams. He's talking about talking about embracing being a 4-phase special teams player. And just like a Mack Hollins, which I told you just on, I told the story before in random happenstance. I stumbled across him at a hotel when I was staying there. Mack Hollins is a big dude. Like, Mack Hollins is all of the 6'5", 225 he's listed as. Like, he is a big dude. He's carved out a very healthy, now I think coming up on 10-year NFL career. by embracing the fact that, hey, when you're big and fast, you can play special teams and everything else is kind of a bonus. Chase Claypool is 25 years old. And if he embraces the fact that, hey, 6'3", 230 and real fast, you can carve out a really nice career as core special teams guy that sometimes contributes as a receiver. And if he's down with that, like at what we're paying him, that's a perfectly reasonable wide receiver 6, because most teams wide receiver 6 is not a guy who can ever contribute on scrimmage downs and go out and run a route. You're only a special teams guy. You're the Taiwan Jones of running backs. Like you're the Tyler Matakevich of linebackers. So if we get it where he actually gets his head wrapped around the idea of I can just be a special teams guy and anything else is a bonus, well, then I am more interested than, even if I like the idea of a Xavier Johnson or letting Tyrell Shavers get a stab at it, or, I guess we'll talk about Isabella and Hamler with the return thing. But that idea of having a guy with Claypool's previous track record as the break glass in case of emergency, like I'm intrigued by that. Like I'm more open to that. I thought, and still a piece of me wonders if that same entitled malcontent guy is hidden in there and he's just saying these things, but I'm at least open to that now. And I'll say the day he was signed, I wasn't even open to that idea.
Yeah, no. And a little bit of me is skeptical. It's easy. You've hired people, right?
Yeah.
I've hired people in the past, and my old boss said you got to give people like not more than 30 days. You almost need like a 60-day window to like really start to see them. And it's easy.
My worst hiring whips are the guys who talk themselves into the role, and I realized then we're just
they weren't who they were telling you they are. And I'm a firm believer in believe somebody when they show you who they are. When somebody shows you who they are, believe them. And he has multiple opportunities and shown us who he is. So maybe it's true. Maybe we will see a different side of him. But I like this comment here by Clifford. Mack is a lock bearing a disastrous camp preseason, and his sleeper is Hamler to find a significant role first part of the season through the postseason. If Hamler can stay healthy, there's a lot of intrigue there. I think of what Isaiah McKenzie was able to do with Josh Allen at times and being a man beater. And we talk about the Bills needing somebody to be able to stretch the field. And like you do have some pieces that you have, like Shakir's fast. You've got, I think that Coleman's going to be able to provide some of that downfield presence, but Hamler's like a real legitimate field stretching type speed guy. His only issue has been staying healthy. If he can come to Buffalo and Buffalo has really good facilities to help guys get there and stay healthy, that could be a really intriguing one. And that was a buy low, one of those like late season additions, buy low on a guy. Like
here, let's do another quiz. Who was put in draft order for me? Andy Isabella, KJ Hamler, and Chase Claypool. And I'll give everyone a hint who doesn't know this. All three were second-round picks in the recent past. Who was drafted higher? Chase Claypool, Andy Isabella, or KJ Hamler?
Andy Isabella. Wasn't he drafted the highest out of them?
It's actually KJ Hamler.
Was it?
KJ Hamler was 46th.
Okay.
KJ Hamler was 46th in the 2020 draft. Chase Claypool was 3 picks later, 49 in that same 2020 draft. Andy Isabella was the year before in 2019. He actually was pick 62. He was famous.
Okay.
He went pick 62, but it was also 2 picks before DK Metcalf. So that's why he gets famous for going so early, is that he went 2 picks before Andy Isabella or DK Metcalf. But KJ, so when you talk about those 3 players, and that's why, whether I'm not sure I agree with Cliff in that Hamler isn't probably my pick for the sleeper guy, but it's not a completely nonsense idea, because when you're talking about guys who were day 2 picks and they were top 60 picks in the NFL, JG saying Curtis Samuel was a second round pick too, although Curtis Samuel has achieved much more than those guys have in production in the NFL and deserved the contract he got. But you're at least talking about some pedigree, some legitimacy to the fact that, like, hey, there's been a significant belief in these guys, and each of them have had flashes in their NFL production, even if none of them could sustain it for different reasons. Claypool seemed to be kind of in his own head and not able to handle things that way. Hamler has purely been health related. Like, he's had explosive plays. The guy can't just stay on the field. He cannot stay on the field. Isabella is probably a little in between, and probably more lacking the production side of it. But at least I don't mind anytime you're going to throw those kind of darts out there as an upside play. Throw it at guys who have explosive speed, explosive size potential, previous high draft picks. And if one of them hits, that's great. And if they don't, sorry, tough luck.
Yeah, I agree.
All right. So before we get into the the tail end of thing, let's talk about the guys that matter here. In that top group, I know we've seen a couple different things, and there's been a lot of excitement with Keon Coleman. I am getting a sneaky suspicion that maybe Curtis Samuel ends up with a little more of a role or a little more production than people expect. I do think if I had to place a bet on who has the most targets this year in this receiving room, I'd be really hard pressed not to pick Shakir. Like, I do think that he's by far the most likely to lead the team, lead the receiving group in targets. I do think it's a fair argument someone from next week's show could lead the team in targets. But I do think Shakir is right there and could lead the team in targets. I'm starting to wonder, maybe Samuel's closer than I initially thought. I know I did that one tweet of the, Brandon B and you can replace him in the aggregate thing from Moneyball and kind of played around with what the top 4 target guys were last year and what they'll be this year. And I'm wondering maybe I undersold where Curtis Samuel could come in that.
So in like playing around with numbers, I haven't solidified on any like exact guesses. I hate to project exact guesses, but when I am playing around with those numbers, I am basically saying Samuel and Shakir about equal touches, like maybe or targets, like maybe 70-ish targets each of those guys. Like last year you had Diggs at 175, which like to your point, we're going to replace those targets in the aggregate, right?
This was a super back of the napkin math. This is not anything scientific. This is just me trying to get the two
receptions and yards. Yeah, this is even targets. Yeah, this is the receptions.
But here I had Shakir with a huge jump. I mean, he only had 45 targets last year.
I had him at 52 from PFF, but
that probably includes the playoffs.
Okay. Yes.
Because I think in regular season it was 45, and then it was 7 more in the playoffs. But he only.
I'm assuming we go to the playoffs again. So
yes, I do hope so. I do sincerely hope so. But yeah, I think I was pretty conservative here with there. I think that both Shakir and Samuel could be closer to Kincaid, but I'm starting to wonder maybe there's a little bit more there for Samuel.
I think so. And I actually see this being driven heavily by the two of those guys. I know there's a lot of hype around Keon Coleman, and I'm excited for his possibility too, but I don't think he's going to come in and just take those touches away from those guys in this offense right away. I think he'll be a part of the offense, but I could see him being 4th or even 5th in targets by the end of the year. I
fully expect him to be 4th.
Yeah. I think there's a chance.
Maybe red zone.
Maybe some red zone. I think there's a chance that the way those targets get split up between the 4th, 5th, and 6th guy, whether that's MVS, Coleman, Knox, maybe, or there's James Cook's also in here. Like, there's only one ball to go around. And so when you start getting out of that top 3, somebody's going to lose that game of musical chairs of who's getting the actual targets. I'm not saying snap counts or anything like that, but where the ball is actually going to end up going. I think it's going to take a little bit of time for him to build some of that trust. I think it's going to take a little time for him to ramp up in the offense, where a guy like Khalil Shakir, I think, has built that trust with Josh Allen already. I think we should expect to see a big jump from him. I think Samuel is going to build that very quickly here this summer. I think he's going to be built into this offense, seemingly handpicked by Brady, right? Like, has worked with Brady before. There is something for him in this offense.
By far his best pro
statistical season. Yeah, productive season. It was with Joe Brady. And obviously, we're not here to talk about Kincaid, but the amount of targets that are potentially going to go his way do impact this room, and where you're not going to have last year. So we're missing a couple hundred targets between Diggs and Davis that were wide receiver specific targets last year. And now you're going to pull those out. There's going to be a bit of a vacuum, but I'm expecting a huge increase of those to head towards Kincaid here this year in year 2 too. So that kind of changes the dynamic of how those targets are spread to wide receivers.
Yeah, just those two is 241, but you have to remember there was also another healthy chunk, guys like
So
Latavius Murray, Trent Sherfield, Deontay Hardy. That was another
I was
65
going
with
to say
those
70
three.
or so touches. Just
So I think in total, the overall number is 323. There are 323 vacated targets.
yeah,
That's so many. So I mean, you could then Khalil Shakir could go from 45 to 100 and give him 55 more and have 100 targets. I think it's very much in play.
do you
Kincaid
think
could
any
go
wide
from
receiver is going to
91
get
to
100?
120.
Because
Maybe add 100. Maybe add 100. I
Okay.
don't know that it would go way over. I think that you could see if you told me Khalil Shakir had 100 catches for 82 or 82 catches for 100 targets, I would say okay, like that's the high end of what I would expect, but I would
I feel like you're just
be on board. I'm just trying to make you feel
You're
good.
just trying to make me feel good about Cole. I think the high end of the wide receiver room is going to be like 75 to 80 targets. And again, I think that I can see a scenario where it's Samuel and Shakir maybe getting
Sure.
70 each or something like that. And then Coleman maybe gets, I don't know, 50 to 60 targets, and MVS is in there with whatever 40 targets, and then you break them up with whoever else, Cook, Knox, and add up the rest of the targets that way. But I do believe in that meme of we're going to fill this with the aggregate, and you won't see one guy be like. The reason Diggs got to his whatever 100 and something targets, 160 is because you fed Diggs in spots and you force fed the ball in spots. And I do think some of these guys will get plays drawn up specifically for them where you're trying to get a guy in space. But I don't think you're going to see Josh Allen just going back and just forcing the ball to a Khalil Shakir. And so that, to me, feels like I'll be shocked if anyone hits the 100 target mark in that wide receiver room. Kincaid, absolutely.
Oh, yeah. I had Kincaid going from 91 to 120. I had Kincaid at 120, and I think I had Khalil Shakir with 90 targets to get his 65.
Is it crazy if I think I think Kincaid might be like 130 to 135? Is that wild?
I mean, there's plenty to support it. There's plenty to support it, and I think the fact that especially on those
we can save that for next week.
Save it for next week.
I'm thinking out loud here, Greg. Sorry.
Get ahead of ourselves. So I agree. I think that no matter what, you're gonna have that realm. I think that we could see I think we could see Mack Hollins have more than Trent Sherfield. Last year, Trent Sherfield had 22. I think we could see a little more than that from Mack Hollins. I think last year, you looked at what the second and third receivers had. I think obviously that's going to come down quite a bit. But again, when we're talking about all of those 320 vacated targets is so many. You could have a really big increase for a lot of guys. That can get.
We're going to run the ball a lot more.
No, don't get started there. So, Kincaid taking up 30 of those by going up. Let's give him 40. Let's put him at 130. We'll give him 40 of those. So we're now down to 280. We're going to take Shakir from 45. We're going to give him 100. We're going to put him all the way to 100. That's 55 of those. We're now down at 225. We're going to give Keon Coleman 75. We're going to give him a big chunk right off the bat, 75. That's still 150. We're going to give another 80 to Curtis Samuel. That's still 70 more targets that are still out there. So even if I give 30 of those to or 40 of those to Mack Hollins, there's still 30 more floating around.
Yeah, but those add up real quick when you talk about Cook and
no.
You're just talking
Cook
about
Cook already had 55. So so yes, if I want him to go from 55 to 85, but that's a ton for a running back. So it's still because
Davis
Dawson
gets on.
Dawson Knox and James Cook already had those. but I'm still counting some of those. Like some of those
Right.
are still baked in there because they're already part of that number. So that's what I mean. Like 320 vacated targets when I'm still counting some for Kincaid and Cook and Shakir and Knox and guys still, and Ty Johnson and guys still on the team. It's a lot. So I think that there's a huge vacuum to be filled by these guys. And, we'll see who steps up into those roles. And I do think that maybe that, everybody's going to eat mentality. We do see, Sherfield and Hardy as wide receiver 4 and 5 with 22 and 21. I do think MVS and Mack Hollins will have more than that as receivers 4 and 5 this year. So that brings that floor up, that sucks up some of those. You see the increase from the other guys. Maybe we see more of an effort to throw it to Cook. And I certainly think that, Ray Davis showed a lot in his college career running the screen game, but Latavius Murray had 22 targets last year. Like that's not an insignificant amount. So I don't know that RB2 gets way less than that. I do think it's going to be a group mentality to hit that overall number.
Yeah, I do think so too. And that honestly, I've been kind of hitting on this when we were getting into the draft season and before we even knew necessarily Stephon Diggs, when the idea was, is Stephon Diggs taking a step back, I think this is the new NFL and the NFL is transitioning this way. We saw what happened. Look what happened with the Kansas City Chiefs when they lost Tyreek Hill. Everyone's like, that offense is going to go, like, how do you replace that vacuum and stuff like that? And it is in the aggregate. I do think that when you have a quarterback under contract, like the Bills have, look at the contract. If you want to talk about the contract Jalen Waddle just got, like, the Bills are in a position where they can afford to pay less for more guys and hope to get the production from many versus let's put all of our eggs or many of our eggs in a basket or two and hope these guys don't get hurt and hope they play up to their contract and get the production there. I think this is a smart way in the modern NFL to build an offense and get the production out of multiple pieces.
Eric with the nice shout out here saying, I think the wide receiver room will be fine. The real question is, can any of them knock in a shot from 170 out for an Eagle?
No. Only I can do that. It was 167, but
congratulations for anyone who isn't aware. Aaron,
I've got the ball behind me. Actually, I'm gonna bronze it or something. I don't know what I'm gonna do with it.
Hold out from 167 for Eagle. That's freaking awesome, dude. That is like a hole. That's a hole in one.
It was
had a
very
hole
cool.
in one today.
Yeah, and it was on a par 4, which is super rare for the people that know golf. Like that's usually your Eagles come on par 5s, and I eagled on a par 4. So I'm very excited about that. I played terrible today though with Sal Capaccio. Sal and I went and played Brighton, so golf humbled me very quickly the next day, as it always does.
As it does.
I got a question for you. What'd you say for the targets for Coleman? You said like 70? 70?
Yeah.
Just in the conversation.
So I think I had him at 70 targets, 50 catches. I had him for 50 catches for 708, 6 touchdowns. So 70 targets for 50 catches.
How many rookie wide receivers last year do you think went over 70? How many did you say for catches?
50 catches.
50 catches. How many do you think went over 50 catches?
So it's not cheating because I didn't look at catches, but I did know that overall what I was projecting for him would have been like the 9th highest fantasy production last year. So I would have guessed in that range, 10, 8 had more or something like that.
7. You're very good. It was 7 went over. So that would be.
And he was the 8th receiver taken there, the 9th receiver taken this year. So I mean, that's kind of what you expect to happen. Is that's how that's supposed to work.
Yes, although Puka Nacua broke all of that.
Correct. Don't get me wrong. There is a non-zero chance that we see more of a breakout if he ends up being more special than we think. You could see that earlier in his career, and that he does have a profile that is has a higher capacity and ceiling than both Shakir and Samuel. So if we ended up hitting on that pick, that's certainly feasible. And I've said it the whole time. I've described his ceiling as T. Higgins. T. Higgins' rookie season, who was also the second round pick, was also the 33rd overall pick. He had 108 targets for 67 catches. So similar catch rate, longer down the field, that same kind of function, but they fed him 108 targets. I don't see any realistic scenario where you see that, but I guess if we did see a world where we had whatever anyone would describe as a breakout season for Keon Coleman, maybe you saw something where that let's see, 108 over, that was in a 16 game season because it was prior to the 17. That's 6.7 per game. So if you told me in the second half of the season Keon Coleman really established himself, and in the second half of the season he had 54 targets because he really ramped up and earned Josh's trust, and that ended up being why he had 85 or 90, because he had kind of eased into it, and then down the stretch really started to earn those 6 or 7 targets a game. You could tell me a story where that ended up happening, because that would mean we hit on the pick. That would mean that, this was there. Laura, with the real congratulations. I took down Kyle Salagi and won the Cover One Bills trivia competition this year. Kyle beat me in the last question last year, and I had to avenge my loss. So I appreciate Laura for shouting that out.
Congratulations. I'm proud of you.
Yeah, thank you.
Do you get a trophy or anything, or is it just...
I have not received anything.
You should do what I do. I used to, when I at work, we would have like silly competitions, and I would make myself trophies.
Yes, that's I need
send
to
them to myself.
I need to
and
go
then put them up
myself.
behind me. Yeah.
While we're talking about trophies, my parents cleaned out like my corner of the attic that they had kept forever, like my varsity jacket, and like they kept like the brackets from my wrestling tournaments. Like when you win a wrestling tournament, you get the bracket.
Yeah.
They had all the brackets from the tournaments I won, and like a couple boxes of like a bunch of boxes of really cheesy like 5th place trophies and things like that. Like no one wants that, but there were a couple cool ones, and I did bring a couple home. Those kind.
I want to see one at least behind you.
I'll
find a
pick
spot.
I'll pick one out.
All right,
to put it behind me. All right. So one final topic that we wanted to talk about here this week was, I had to go read a little bit about it, but our segment for our William Mattar Here to Help is the new kickoff rule. And it's something where I even had to go research it a little bit and kind of make sure that I was because I was trying to think like, hey, can I even describe this properly? I don't even know if I know how to describe it. So for anyone who didn't watch, it is the setup as the XFL rule, where you're going to be set up in the kickoff is still going to take place from the 35, but instead of the players lining up back there at the 35 like we've seen forever in the NFL and running down the field, they are going to be set up at what they're calling like this staging area at the opponent's 40. So already in the opponent's area, the return team will be lined up directly across from them and doing it, set up there. And now the rule is going to force teams to return kick. So this green area, anywhere between the 20 and the end zone, that is called the landing area, you must return the kick. You cannot fair catch. You have to return the kick. And in the XFL, I believe it resulted in a 90% return rate, because if you kick it into the end zone, I believe the ball comes out to like the 40. I have to look through and make sure again that I'm describing the rule properly. If the ball lands before or beyond the landing zone, a touchback will result in the offense starting on the 30, a 5-yard increase from previous years. So teams are not going to want to give teams that area. And this is a clip from the actual XFL kickoff that was there. And it, anyone who hasn't seen it, that's what it looks like. The two teams lining up. Once the player catches it, you can then start to run with it. And it could be a fun way to do it. I do think there's a possibility that it's going to impact running backs. Maybe you brought up Ty Johnson last week. Let's assume that, as tradition has been, that it's been receivers. Who do you think that benefits the most on this Bills 90-man roster?
Can I pause for a second? Ask if I don't know if you know the answer to this. What happens if a ball lands on like the 2 or 1 and goes into the end zone because it lands in the landing zone?
if the ball hits within the landing zone and then goes into the end zone, the result is a 20-yard touchback, so it hurts the offense. So the
Okay,
offense
so
is
incentivizes you
incentivized
to catch.
not to,
Okay,
yeah,
I wasn't
not
sure
to
if you
let
could
that happen.
sneak
No, but that's a great
a
question.
close.
They did the competition committee. It is foreign. It looks weird, but it's set up with all the proper incentives. You reduce the
Right.
injury element because now you don't have guys running 40
Full
yards
speed.
on the field to hit
Yeah.
each other. It is a much safer play. It's now like a zone running play, basically. So you reduce that and you've incentivized all the things, just like they made the extra points, where before it was just this like complete formality that nobody even cared about. So now, like, oh man, I hope we make the extra point because guys miss every season. Like there's way more misses. You made it a real play. It's going to make this a real play. And I went through and researched the averages. So if they get their target, which I don't know for sure that they're going to, but last year there were 4 teams that kicked off over 100 times, but the average team kicked off 86 times per year. So if they get their target of 90%, let's say it's only 80 or 85%, you're still talking about 70 plus kick returns on average for every team. The average would actually be 76. That's a lot of touches. Like that's a significant. Look how we just talked about targets. So if your estimate for targets is correct and that it's more 70, 80 targets, that means no receiver on the Buffalo Bills would get 76 catches, which means this role is more touches than any receiver on the team would have from scrimmage. That's a huge role. How do you think teams are going to prioritize that, or who do you think that benefits on this Bills team?
The way I envision it is I think teams are going to try to weaponize it offensively to generate explosives. This is something that's been removed from the game over the past 4 years, is getting explosive plays out of return game. And so now that you have this, and offensively, the special team side, the offensive side of that is going to try to probably be ahead of the curve of the defense on this to get those explosive plays. So I think I do agree with you that there will be a lot of running backs used and utilized in those
I think Ty
roles
Johnson is a very logical possibility.
especially if you are going to game day active, that third running back, that gives him a, like, okay, you're at least doing this part. If you're not participating on it, like if we're just going to go with James Cook and Ray Davis and just have you there as an emergency, you can at least participate in this way. But I said it in the Slack channel, like, I don't really want it if he's going to be one of our top receiver target guys, but Khalil Shakir seems like a guy that he's got the skill set for it. He's got great vision. He can make explosive plays in a situation like that. Curtis Samuel, you brought him up. I think he plays well in that type of position. Keon Coleman, at least in the punt return game in Florida State, I think that he can do things with the ball in his hand that would be interesting. And then Hamler, like if he was to make this team that type of speed, I don't know how well it will translate to this kickoff.
I'd go as far as to say that's his only shot to make this team.
Probably in that special teams role. And so what I would envision, or what I would do, is have a bunch of guys that you're practicing and repping this with and utilize it as it doesn't have to be just a Ty Johnson job, but let's use different weapons and work different things in and work different guys in to try to create explosives throughout the year. So I could see some weeks Shakir getting some of those looks and some weeks it being a Ty Johnson role. And so like having different guys that can do it, and you ride the hot hand with this new weaponized special teams play.
I don't know why, but I have this idea in my head of, if the size speed combination is going to translate, is that something Chase Claypool could do? Like if you get, if you're going to find a way that works with the,
I haven't really ever seen him with like
230, and it's not
vision,
wiggle. It's just it's just
running in vision, which I think you'll need in that.
It would be much more so the return version of a Cordarrelle Patterson. The Cordarrelle Patterson is much more hey, pick a lane and use your size, speed, explosiveness to see if you can bust through it before they can get you. I just a piece of me wonders if that's a path here.
We're talking about go ahead.
It's me trying to figure out what is this new play going to look like,
right?
And that how much of that is the kind of idea of a big zone run where it's kind of slide, put your foot in the ground and go, and I'm curious who's gonna translate the best in that versus like the wiggle. I see Shakir and Keon Coleman as our punt return guys. I'm curious if that will be the skill set that they want in the new kick return. But I won't lie, I didn't watch a lot of XFL football, so I don't know exactly what skill set translates in that new rule.
And I think a lot of this too will be, we're talking about the incentive that they're creating to return so that you get more yardage out of these new returns. But there is also an incentive to the kick team because they're forced to return.
Yeah.
You're gonna get teams in worse field position than we're used
Pin
to
it in the
seeing, where teams,
corner, try to get cute. You end up getting somebody at the 12
and
because
so
they
you
tried to.
really, you're gonna need someone that has, in my opinion, that like vision and smarts with the ball, where the hole isn't always going to be where you think it is, depending on directional kicks and what the kicking team is doing. So I think there's going to be a lot of strategy to it, and it might not be about necessarily generating explosives, but getting back to where you would be on a touchback, even just like, hey, we want to at least net positive, get back to
At
the
least
25
get back
here.
to the 25.
Yeah, and then anything on top of that, fantastic. But let's make sure that we have people behind there that can at least wiggle their way through to get back here. I'd be interested to see, and maybe this is something I'll look into, is what were the numbers on the averages, when they were rolling it out, and did it generate more explosives, or was it teams struggling to get back to the 20? Like, who was winning those battles? Was it the kicking team or the return team? And how will that translate? Do we expect that to also just translate from a inferior league to NFL quality coaches and talent?
And I will say shout out to Eric Galco, who is he's the director of football ops for the Shrine Bowl, like
Yes.
that role there. He also was a big part of creating that rule in the XFL. So check out, it's at Eric Galco. It's EricGalko. He did a thread explaining the logic, the strategy, how he projects that it will impact roster decisions and the kind of players that were best utilized for it. And I'm scrolling through quickly here. I don't know that he talked about the production, but I remember reading somewhere it was very similar to what you described, which was the idea of more negative like field position and more explosives. Right now, like in the NFL, I feel like I can't prove this. It felt like 80% of kick returns ended up between like the 23 and the 28. Like everybody got almost back to it or just past it. I actually don't think that was that common in this. I think it was either breaking explosives or they got you at like
negative
16 or at the 14. And it was like a nice play for the defense. So I'm curious if we see that translate in the same way.
Yeah, same, big time.
Yeah. All right. So let's make one guess here in that structure going into camp. If you had to put your chip on a guy right now, who is the guy you would pick for your sixth receiver on the roster? And I actually want to give a shout out. Somebody posted it up above here. I don't know if I could find, I think it was Roy, that had mentioned, with the fact that we have good tight ends and that, there's four guys who I think are going to make this roster and play between Kincaid, Knox, Gilliam, and Morris. And we have a deep running back room and we know all the versatility there. And we talked about maybe with this new rule, there's more linebackers this year. Is there a scenario where there isn't a wide receiver 6 and there's 5 and maybe we keep Claypool and Isabella and Hamler all on the practice squad and we just use them if we need it? Like I don't know that I'm going to project it that way, but I can tell myself a story that we keep 5 receivers.
Yeah. I think we get pigeonholed into the idea that it's gonna be 6, right? Because that's just what we're used
Correct.
to.
It is. We've also had a few snippets with 7 and a few snippets with 5. I think we've had 6 the vast majority of the time, but there are periods of time where we've had 5 and periods of time where we had 7.
I could see for the initial cut down, you could just see 5. I think, and just so you are getting that are people on the practice squad that aren't going to be poached or you feel aren't going to get poached.
Especially the
But
veteran guys can't get claimed. So you have
sure.
guys like Claypool and Isabella and Hamler, and now where they couldn't get claimed. If you know they're going to sign back, you could work that out.
Yeah, I think for the sake of the hypothetical that you presented to me, we'll assume it's 6.
Yeah,
Here
yeah,
for
and I do think that's more likely. I think
sure.
Roy's scenario is in play, but it's also more likely that 6 do make it.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna go with Claypool.
I'm gonna go 51-49 that Shorter still has a lead on him, and that the draft capital still gives him some head start, but it barely. I'm gonna barely go Justin Shorter over Claypool as wide receiver 6. But yeah, I probably will change my mind 3 practices into
Just
training.
today, he feels like a easier keep him on the practice squad
Yeah,
than just the name of Claypool.
correct, correct, correct. I do think
That's the name.
I do think it would be easier to get Justin Shorter, Andy Isabella, and Xavier Johnson on the practice squad
Yeah,
than it would be Chase Claypool.
which is
Yeah.
weird at this point in
It's
his
weird.
career.
It's true. I don't even like
And
it. I don't feel good about
I
it.
am also banking, even though I didn't like it. I don't like bringing them here, and I'm going to sound like a hypocrite because I said when someone shows you who they are, believe them. But I do also believe, as much flack as Sean McDermott has gotten, and as much flack as the idea of culture and stuff like
Right.
that, the idea of come here to be the best version of yourself, and the way that we hear guys like Shaq Lawson talk about going other places and
Yeah.
coming back here, and the culture that is here, it might just be the thing he needs to get the most out of what people have seen in him. And so
And I will
I'm
say
banking on some of that to work out for him.
if you want to tell yourself a story where this ends up working out for him, the idea of, hey, you got pawned off by the Steelers and traded. And then I get it being entitled going to Chicago because you had produced really good in your first 2 years and had some high expectations of what you should be doing, and you get there and it doesn't really work out. But then the fact that you got given away for nothing to go to Miami and then couldn't even really get on the field for them, and then went into free agency and no one wanted you. Like, if you're going to tell
This
yourself
is
a
it.
story
Last
of,
chance.
yeah, correct, like where you actually have that light bulb moment wake up call that regardless of how talented you think you are, hey, the NFL world just told you nobody really wanted you. Like, if you're going to tell yourself a story where he does finally have it click and get his crap together from a commitment standpoint and not being the entitled guy that we heard about, that's the scenario where that would happen. So
Right.
like I'm not predicting that. I'm not ready to say that that's going to happen, but I'm at least open to the possibility that it's possible, and I probably wasn't open to it with the day he signed.
Yeah. Yeah. And John Robert here brings up it's true. And this
Yes.
is true
Yeah.
for Samuel. This is true
Yes.
for everyone
Mack
coming to the Bills,
Hollins.
right?
Mack Hollins. Yeah.
No, everyone except for MVS.
Yeah. Yeah. Correct. Yeah. Yeah. It's you can make so people will probably be mad at me. You can make a pretty good argument that Marquez Valdes-Scantling is about to play with the worst quarterback of his career.
It's
Because
not an insult that it sounds like, though.
correct,
Yeah.
correct. It's not because the versions of Aaron Rodgers he played
Yeah.
with was the back-to-back
Yeah.
MVP
Premium
Aaron Rodgers,
Yeah.
and then the back-to-back Super Bowl champion Patrick Mahomes, and now the third quarterback he's going to play with is just good old Josh Allen. Like,
Yeah.
it's wild that he's had that career path. He's had the Allen Robinson or some of the guys who play
Right.
with just terrible quarterbacks every single year. And Curtis Samuel is right there. That Curtis Samuel has played with some really bad wide receiver, bad quarterbacks. So that's again a little piece of it. I've used the Robert Woods scenario. Robert Woods had a really late career breakout when he finally played with a good quarterback. Brandon Lloyd had a really late, like third or fourth team late career breakout because he finally played with a good quarterback. There's some precedent for a guy like Samuel to like have a late career breakout same similar to those guys. Lloyd and Robert Woods had similar, like, multiple 500-600 yard seasons, pretty good, but with bad passing offenses, bad quarterbacks, and then all of a sudden a big breakout season when they finally play with an elite guy, and Josh Allen is elite.
He is that is for sure.
Any final messages for the people?
No, we should probably hear from our buddy over at William Mattar, though. He's got a message for the people for sure.
One last message from Bill. Listen to him here.
If you've been in a car crash, you should know this. At William Mattar, there's no fee until we win. That means you don't pay us unless we win your case. If you're hurt in a car, call William Mattar, 444-4444.
I'm gonna convince Bill to come on the show with us before training camp. We got to have him on the show at least.
He's got to, man. I want to go get wings with him still. That was part of the conversations that we had, and I am itching for some wings.
I'm ready for it. I'm ready for it. All right, guys, we appreciate it. Thank you all for hanging out with us here tonight. Again, anybody that you have in your life that's just getting back into the team, getting excited about it, this is a great series to get them caught up on all the people that are on the team, who to get excited about, what to know about. With that Black Wednesday hit a lot of people hard. There's a lot of new names to root for and cheer for. Aaron and I are going to be here for you all the way through the offseason, getting you ready all the way up to training camp, letting you know who's there at each of these position groups to get yourself ready. Next week, we will be diving into the tight end position, maybe the biggest tight end preview we've ever had to do in our stretch here, the most important that role has ever been. Yeah, I mean, the most important role that it's been since we've been here. It's going to be really interesting. I'm excited to talk about it. And we will be here for you next week. Make sure you're checking it out. But on behalf of our awesome producer, Chris Kepner, and Aaron Quinn, I am Greg Tompsett. You've been listening to Cover One Buffalo, and we are